we played this game that came out this week. This has been kind of floating around for a while. This game called Moss, which is about an adorable little mouse named Quill. It's got some very serious kind of like Brian Jacques, like Redwall vibes to it, and it's an interesting game to try to show off. We've seen trailers for it, and it looks nice, but it's a game where you're controlling a mouse, and your head kind of acts as the camera in what's otherwise pretty much just a 3D platformer. But it's a really interesting game, probably in the sense that it's actually it's not that mind blowing. Like, I feel like it's a pretty competent game. It's
succeeding in doing what VR does best, which is taking sort of simple, mundane worlds, environments, and places, and that's not to call this game any of those things, but accentuating them and making them really interesting. Like, if we always talked about in Batman VR, you hold up a clipboard and you spin it around your hand, and that's such a boring thing to do in real life. But in VR, it's really nice. And in this game, this is succeeding in a way that a PSVR game hasn't for me since Wayward Sky, which was a launch game that launched with PSVR, which had that sort of same, I'm a giant person sitting looking down into a real livable space, and I'm interacting with and controlling with and then watching the actions of a tiny, like, action figure sized little character who is interacting with the world and moving around. And the cool thing about this game is you control a mouse, but it really more feels like you're controlling the world, and then you're kind of nudging the mouse along. And you get to pick up things and turn them around and open doors for him or her. I'm not really sure.
It's her. They establish it very clearly.
Do they?
Yeah, they're like, it's a girl mouse.
Really?
They don't say it's a girl mouse.
In the beginning,
they don't say that.
Yes, they.
They don't say it's a girl mouse.
It's a girl mouse. Everybody.
Like a doctor.
Yeah.
Congratulations, it's a girl mouse.
But this is a really smart little game because it sort of shows you this worn down, lived in fantasy world from the perspective of something that's 3 inches tall. And not in the entire world is built for this character. This is a world built for people. And now that mouse is in there sort of on its own scale. Like at one point you see giant swords stuck in the ground that were held by 6 foot tall monsters or whatever we are. You'll see a deer walk up into the background, but you'll also see this mouse run along and be like, oh, there's a tiny kingdom down there too. So I really like the way this game scales. I really like sitting and just sort of looking around these little environments that are kind of puzzle cubes and also sort of fantasy-esque. And there's a little bit of combat, a little bit of platforming, but none of it ever feels too robust. It's all sort of simple and in place.
Well, it's I feel like it's a very, very realistically scaled, in spite of being, the scale being kind of unrealistic on purpose, but in terms of what the game is trying to do. And it's not that it's like, let's put your head somewhere else entirely. Let's make you go up in a world that's like, I mean, we've seen so many games where it's like, it's a first person experience. Let's take you to a different world. In this case, you could theoretically have a very similar game to this where you're just looking at this action happening on a screen, which is why it doesn't look that impressive when you're not seeing it in VR. But in VR, it's not that it's taking you and putting your head in something else. It's more like the game is removing your living room and reality from the equation. Like, you're still using the left stick to move this mouse around and pressing X to jump, and these are very familiar concepts and stuff that you can kind of do in your sleep, and it's comfortable. It feels like a video game should feel, but at the flip side, if you lean in very close, you're seeing something up close and kind of personal. It kind of reminds me of in that movie Her, with the AI.
Oh, yeah.
There's a part where he's playing a game, and it's like this little person it's like this giant kind of 3D diorama that comes to life, and that he's interacting with this thing on the screen. And in that case, there's no controller. But in this case, it feels like you still have you play as this like spirit. Like, you actually you don't just play as like this non-existent entity. It actually addresses you as being like, oh, this is the reader. This is the
and the mouse kind of looks up at you and is like, hey.
Yeah, and it's
really adorable.
There'll be parts where you're over a body of water, and if you look down, you see your reflection, and it's basically this big glowing kind of like ghostly face.
Like a Studio Ghibli ghost or something.
Very Ghibli. Yeah, it's at the same time though, it's not like, hey, we turned you into a mouse. You're in this giant, huge world that's suddenly completely overwhelming. It's more like this is very familiar, but because of that, it doesn't suck to be in there for 3 hours.
Right.
That was just a snippet of this week's Beyond. For the full episode, head over to youtube.com/IGNBeyond and watch and subscribe today. And if you want to make some friends who also listen to Beyond, head over to facebook.com/groups/podcastbeyond and go join the group. I love you.